Gareth O'Shea John, counterintuition.com. This is 5 stupid things about libertarianism debunked. I was just on YouTube. There's a fairly popular guy on there, Steve Shives, and he just uploaded this video a couple of days ago, 5 stupid things about libertarianism, and I just thought I'd give it an old shot. It's nice and brief, so I said I'd give it a go. So he's got 5 points. I'll just read kind of a few. I'll be kind of paraphrasing a few quotes, and I'll just address each one as we go. He does clarify at the beginning of the video he made. He says, like most political philosophies, it's a house of many rooms. So he differentiated libertarianism he was going to be attacking in just what's commonly found in US politics today. And so for that, I'm not really going to disagree with him on the state of libertarianism in politics, but rather libertarianism, or at least it's tough, it's tough when you're talking about libertarianism, because you have like political libertarianism and then you have more kind of philosophical libertarianism, which is effectively anarchism. Unfortunately, anarchism kind of took on a pretty bad name, so a lot of the really good sound philosophical the good sound philosophical anarchists have taken on the name libertarian just to make it more kind of a bit more palatable. It would have been liberal, but that also was hijacked. So maybe 150 years ago, liberal would have meant the same thing, but that was just completely reversed. Now liberal actually means government expansion, all that kind of thing, whereas before it meant freedom, as in liberal, as in liberty, like. So that had to be dropped. Liberal was dropped, and they took on libertarian, which is is really ought to be just anarchism. But what happens is politicians then take libertarianism, or at least politically minded libertarians, go into government and end up messing everything up. So I'm kind of semi on his side when it comes to criticizing libertarian politics, or libertarian politics. But in reality, I mean, there really aren't any libertarians in politics. Maybe the exception of Ron Paul. I'm not sure if he's in politics anymore. I wouldn't be on board with his kind of way of going about things, namely going into government, like infiltrating the mafia by becoming a mafia don, and you're still hurting people, but you hurt less people if you can get your way. But you can't get your way because it's government. I mean, understanding the nature of what the state is, it is coercion, it is violence. Anyway, I'm going too long. I'm going to go 1 to 5. So number 1, it's selfish. Quoting him, he says, it's libertarians are very much, I want to be left alone and I want things my own way. He also says, think how many 5-year-olds are libertarians without even realizing it. That's a very good insight. I think a lot of 5-year-olds are libertarians. I think the majority of 5-year-olds would be effectively libertarian. They are universalizing, property rights. They're universalizing justice, and 5-year-olds, no, I mean, they, parents teach them at a very early age. Non-libertarian parents teach children libertarian ethics, or at least the ethics that is found in libertarianism. Don't hit your sister, don't steal your sister's stuff. I want to be left alone. I mean, to criticize someone to say I want to be left alone, they're not saying I want to be left alone from society. They're saying I want to be left alone from whatever abuse is happening. And so if I perceive an abuse, I want to be left alone is not necessarily something to criticize someone about. Like, you go to some rape victim and she's like, people are like, hey, you want to go out tonight? Let's go get drunk. And she's like, no, I just want to be left alone. And you're so selfish. And I want things my own way. Of course, I mean, the guy is on YouTube. He's clearly telling us his position, and everyone ought to want things their own way, and it's their own way that ought to adjust. So I want people to be happy. I want my family to be happy. I want them to have money. I want money so that I can buy the things that I want for myself and the people around me. I want things my own way. That's my way. If my own way was I want to kill 10,000 people, then that would be wrong. But it's not the wanting it my way that's wrong with that. It's the fact that I'm killing people. That's what's wrong. So absolutely nothing wrong with wanting things your own way. And in fact, anything else is weird. I mean, how could you not want things your own way unless you're some kind of crazy masochist or slave or something? You want things your own way, and I would imagine that even as a as a really strong state, as somebody who approves of the state, you want the state a certain way. That's your way. Okay, so it's really it's really a null point to be going at. So I think just straight away, I think we would discount that one. I want to be now. I kind of get where he's coming from. He's going for the selfishness, like libertarians don't want to pay money. I think this is the spirit behind it, and I'm open to correction here, but the spirit that I'm picking up on here is that people want to earn money and then they don't want to donate it, is the idea. Like the government is this like beneficial collector of resources that will then hand out to sick and dying people and people who need help. There are very few people on this earth who are, I just want to take all this stuff for myself. And the reason for that is even it's a strange thing to say I mean, I've never really understood selfish and because selfish is really what I want. It's the same thing. I want things my own way. It's selfish. I want my wife to be happy. I'm selfish about that. So I guess when people use selfish in that kind of negative way, it's kind of, I guess it's, I want stuff at the exclusion of somebody else, or to steal from somebody else, or to take from somebody else in order to get it. I think that'd be probably the only thing I could say would be how you would define selfishness in a negative light. So I'll stick with that. But, people who want to earn a solid wage, people who are very, very productive and want to earn a solid wage, and then say, you know what, I really am not happy about giving 50-60% of my resources over to other people who don't take care of themselves. No, there really are people who need help. I mean, that's not the point, but very wealthy people are always looking for people to help because there's a great investment opportunity. Anybody who's been in business for more than a year or two would understand that. I mean, when you're in business in a competitive environment, you're constantly looking for niches that you can exploit wherever there is need. Business is only about meeting need. Now, what we have today is something very different. We don't really have business. We don't really have, we see vestiges of it, but we don't really see pure business, pure market, because it's been co-opted, of course, by the state and by large corporations. I mean, a corporation, it's funny when people talk about corporation being anti-capitalistic and hating the corporation. Corporation is a state body. A corporation does not exist without a state. If you didn't have a state, you couldn't have a corporation. A corporation is an entity that can absorb losses by paying for those losses with tax money and protect all of the individuals who lost the money. And whenever the corporation is in profit, all the individuals in that corporation earn money. I mean, they get the profit. So you can basically, it's capitalistic when there's profit and it's socialistic when there's loss. So that's not capitalism. That's what people call crony capitalism. I think a lot of people don't understand that that's not capitalism. It's when you preface it with crony, that means not capitalism. That means something that very, very different. So it's meant to be ironic. It's not capitalism. So if you had no state, you wouldn't have corporations. You wouldn't have any kind of limited companies. You wouldn't have people being able to limit their losses onto people who have no part in their business. The only kind of way to limit losses would be through insurance, and you pay for that. So no, the selfishness thing, it's a result of what we see is when we see the archetype of the corporate bigwig, and he's, like the kind of Scrooge idea where he just wants to make a whole bundle of money and not give to anybody else and to, do all this kind of, that is purely an effect of state power that does not exist. It just doesn't exist in the market. And if it did, because what would happen is if someone went into the marketplace, a marketplace with that mentality, they would be broke in a very short period of time. Because, I mean, you could imagine somebody wanting to hoard all the money in the world. I mean, imagine it. I mean, you could hoard all the money in the world and nobody else has any of it. Well, what are you going to do now? I mean, so you're sitting on a bunch of useless paper. What are you going to do? Because the whole value of money is that you get to exchange it for stuff. And if nobody else has stuff, you're not going to be able to buy anything. It's ridiculous. Money would lose its value overnight if you had all the money in the world. You don't want that. There is always a drive towards equality in the marketplace, because anybody who wants more money, they can go in, they can compete, they can work their way up. And anybody who has money and is already positioned is constantly on the lookout for people to invest in to make more money. And while creating that value that they can then purchase back. I mean, this is the whole idea. So no, okay. Moving on, number 2. Libertarianism alienates people from the government. So, quoting again, libertarians refer to the government as the beast, Big Brother, the state, with a capital S. They view the government as the enemy of the people. He also says the thing is, a constitutional, democratically elected government, like the one we have, doesn't have to be the enemy. It can actually be the most powerful, effective tool of the people. Libertarian politicians would rather sabotage the government than work to make it better and more effective. He says that it's bad for those of us who would agree with Lincoln's of, by, and for the people thing. Now, this is very problematic as a position. Libertarians refer to government as beast, big brother, state. Sure. They view the government as the enemy of the people. Yes, not necessarily. I don't view the government as an enemy of the people. Government is an enemy of of a lot of people. It is a friend of a smaller group of individuals. So no, I mean, the government helps people who are, like people who are not earning any money. It really does help them to pay for their rent and pay for all this kind of stuff. What it doesn't, what is the unseen cost? The kind of Frederick Bastiat. If you just Google the broken window fallacy, you get a kick out of that one. That's the idea of there's unseen costs. Okay, and the very fact that people are poor in the first place can actually be attributed to the existence of a state. Investment capital is completely swallowed up in taxation. Regulation has stopped businesses from innovating. The poorest in society, you look at minimum wage, the whole idea, when minimum wage was first introduced in the States, it was a means to lock poorer black families out of the marketplace. The whole idea is that you're not able to pay below a certain wage. If you can't do that, then poorer people who have less skills and who are less market valuable, and we're not talking about the people are equally valuable, of course, but on the market in business, people have values, right? Somebody who is a brain surgeon can get paid more than someone who works in a retail. That's just obvious. It doesn't mean that the guy's more valuable in terms of his some kind of existential human way. He's completely equal, but in terms of business and interaction in society, there is a value scale, and so poorer people, when you introduce a minimum wage, can now not get jobs. And that was the whole idea, that they knew exactly what they were doing. You can find it. I mean, you can find documents from politicians and lobby groups who were trying to get this thing passed. It was going to be their way of fighting against the black people's rise to power. This was we can't tell people not to hire them, but what we can say is you have to pay this amount, and of course, if somebody can't produce that amount or more than that amount for a company, then nobody's going to hire them, so they don't get hired, and there's a perpetual loop of and I mean, we know this stuff. We know how welfare works. It locks people down. Like, this may not have been. You could have got away with saying this, maybe 40, 30 years ago. Right now, we know absolutely categorically that welfare is what locks people into poverty. There are actual ways out of poverty, and government absolutely cannot provide it. I mean, how kind for the government to come along and steal a whole bunch of money from people to give to somebody else. That's not charity. That's just stealing. And the vast majority of those resources do not even go near people. They go into things like, bailing out the banks and subsidies for various corporations and companies. So that's not capitalism. As soon as there's government involved, there is no capitalism. There's just people struggling to it really is socialism. That you can't have a free business. Like in Ireland right here, if I wanted to just go out and set up a business, I mean, the amount of paperwork, the amount of taxes I have to register for, the amount of regulations, no matter what business it is. I mean, there's no business you can just, all I want to do is set up something and serve a need. I mean, the hoops that you have to jump through, it's ridiculous. And think of all the businesses that have never come into existence because of these hurdles, regulatory hurdles. And the whole point is, again, it's to lock people out. I mean, I would consider myself among, as far as government's concerned, I'm among the poor class, and they're constantly erecting regulation to stop poorer people from competing with richer people, and that's not capitalism. He also said, so the thing is, a constitutional, democratically elected government like the one we have today in the States. I think that's pretty funny. Come on, I mean, does anybody really think that you have a constitutional, democratically elected government in the States? Maybe in the States, it's the news is different, but we know what's going on over there. There's nothing constitutional about the government over there right now. And even if it was, I don't even get. There's this big push towards this constitutionality. I don't get it. I mean, how can you have a piece of paper from a couple hundred years ago be legally binding if nobody was there to sign it? It just doesn't make any sense. You can't just say, you have to obey this document. I mean, if anybody could, I can just do that. I can say, I'm a government, I've got a constitution, and you all have to obey me. Anyway, whatever. So, like, the only have doesn't have to be an enemy. It can actually be the most powerful, effective tool of the people. This is kind of, I don't really know how that could be the case. I'm not sure how government is the most powerful, effective tool of the people. If you have the vast majority of people who want to use a tool, why do they need a state, right? I mean, the whole idea of the state is to impose things coercively. I don't think anybody would argue with me on that one. What categorizes government as separate to any other organization on earth is that it gets to force you to do stuff, which means that it can't possibly be an effective tool of the people. If the people wanted something, they would just do it, or hire businesses to do it through, some entrepreneur saying, the people want this, and then they make it, and then people buy it. I mean, that's where iPhones and computers and cars and everything cool comes from, that we all pay for and use. We don't need some central company to go, we need we all need to have cars, so you're all going to contribute a certain amount, and you're all going to get cars. And we saw this. I mean, this is where the Beetle came from. Everybody driving around the black cars, or the Lada in Russia. That's what they tried, and they had this one crappy car. So no, it's not a powerful, effective tool of the people. By definition, it is not. Because again, just in order to, if there was something that the people wanted, and when you say the people, you're talking about the vast majority, not a few individuals. If the vast majority of people want something, it would come about. You don't need to use force to do it. So that can't be right. Libertarian politicians would rather sabotage the government and work to make it better and more effective. That's also not true. I mean, libertarians who get into politics, again, you saw with Ron Paul, he got in and he wanted to dismantle the Fed, and he didn't get to be president, but he got pretty far, and he's in Congress, or he was in Congress at least. And he came up with a couple of bills to dismantle the Fed and dismantle this, that, and the other. And of course, none of them were passed. And he ended up voting on bills that he had specifically, said he would stay away from. I don't want to criticize Ron Paul here, but I think once you get into the realm of politics, there's very little power in your hands anymore. Again, that's a definitional thing. Even by the ideal, if you're a politician and you get elected by a vast majority of people, then by the ideal, you should do what these people want you to do, which means you don't have a will of your own, right? You're doing what they wanted. You're only elected because they said you are the guy to pull that off. So you do whatever they tell you. In reality, what happens is you get in there and it's a bunch of corporations and existing politicians and structures that have been in place for hundreds of years that you have to obey. I mean, you have to, otherwise you're out. And so in order to be a politician, you don't get to do anything. You get to only do what it is you're told. Libertarian politicians would rather sabotage the government. I don't think we've seen that. I really don't. Maybe people who are running to be politicians who are running to be in some kind of office talk about it. There's obviously rhetoric, but I don't think they really work to do anything about it. Okay, so yeah, he says that's bad for those of us who would agree with Lincoln's of, by, and for the people thing. I don't want to go into Lincoln right now. I mean, that's nice rhetoric and all, but Lincoln was a monster, and I would just always be very wary associating myself with a man like that. Okay, number 3, it's anachronistic. The Fed, Social Security, Medicare, Civil Rights Act, etc. were brought about because there was a recognized need for them. Societies grow and evolve, and so do the needs and interests of their members. Again, this is kind of feeding into my last point. There's a recognized need for something. Why then do you need to force people to do it, right? And again, I think where he could probably come back at me here would be, okay, so you have these very wealthy small group of individuals who have all the resources in the world, and in order to get them back for the people, you need to have a forceful entity. But in reality, the vast majority of these things are paid for by the poor people themselves, the Fed, Social Security. I mean, look at the Fed, what the Fed does by inflating the money, the existing stock of money. Without going into too much detail, when inflation happens, whoever gets the money down the road, so we say the same $50 bill or €50 bill gets passed on from one to the next. If you print a new one, so let's say the entire economy is just one €50 note. The entire economy is one €50 note, just for the sake of this example. And let's say I have it, and I'm one of 2 people in society, okay, or one of 3 people. And so I turn to this guy next to me, and he owns a bunch of islands and some cars and houses and that. And he says, I'm looking to sell this stuff up. I want to build somewhere else. Let's call it €50. And I say, cool, okay, I'll do that. And so €50 has been established as the entire worth of all this property, right? So we've established that €50 is the entire economy, and I'm going to exchange this entire economy's worth of money for all this stuff, which is now which equates to the practical economy. If that night a third party came along and he printed another €50 note and came into the marketplace, and he went to this guy and says, actually, I'd like to buy this stuff. And he does. He gives him €50. Now there's another €50 in the economy. So what's actually happened is, so this guy owns all this stuff, but there's still €50 in the economy outside of the person who earned it. So you now have €100, which halves the stock. If we were to go back for sale now again, what that property would be worth would be €100, right? If we're saying it's the same amount, if like what I had established at first was the entire economy's worth is worth this property, and he sells it now, then the entire economy's worth is now €100. So now I would have to pay €100 to buy the same land, which that's what what drives costs up. So I don't know if that's clear enough, but if you want to study inflation, that will tell you exactly what the Fed is doing. And so all the way down the road, whoever ends up later on after the money is printed gets less. For every hand it passes to, it devalues. It's devaluing over time, and so. The poorest in society are the people who get the money last. All the money gets to all the rich people first, the middle class people, and then eventually to the poor people. And by the time that happens, prices have gone up, and that's the Fed has caused that. So no, the Fed causes people to be poor. Social Security is the same thing. I mean, you're taking money out of investments and out of productive people's hands, and you're cutting jobs basically by providing Social Security. People now are dependent on not providing any kind of an exchange for money. Now they have to sit, and they really do have to, because the jobs are not there anymore. You've taken from the people who create jobs, and you've given it straight to you've cut out the middleman, I guess, or created two more, I guess would be it. But it's completely arbitrary. Medicare, I mean, come on, medical costs are through the roof because of Medicare subsidies. So societies grow and evolve, and so do the needs and interests of their members. They're saying that there's a recognized need for them. This is all I'm talking about. I mean, if there's a recognized need for something, businesses, entrepreneurs, and charities rise up to meet that need once they're free to do so, once they have the resources. If those resources are being taken from them all the time, then they can't do that. So society is growing and evolving, and so do the needs of this is a very interesting statement. Societies grow and evolve, and so do the needs and interests of their members. What is society but the needs and interests of their members? It's interesting, is this idea, and this is very Lincoln as well, that there's this society outside of people, or at least outside of people's needs and interests. This is what it is. I mean, society is people meeting, people gathering together, working together, playing together, drinking together. All of this involves, needs being met and interests. That's what society is. If there's anything else to society, I don't know I've never heard of it. I can't understand a definition that wouldn't include those. So societies grow and evolve, and so do the needs and interests of their members. This is a very strange concept, but it reveals that there is something more that's kind of ideal, and this is really at the heart of statism. I mean, the guy calls himself an atheist, which is absolutely fine, but statism is just taking the place. He sees the state as the provider of the need. I mean, you look at what God was to so many theists. You have God there for healthcare. You get sick, you pray to God. You're poor, you pray to God. You have a financial need, you pray to God. There's crime, or should I say sin? You've sinned, and you need to pay for that. The state puts you in prison, or gives you parole, or gives you a fine to pay, and now you're fined again. This is sin and law are synonymous. It's a religious idea. Law is a religious idea. The state is a religious idea. And this is kind of, I don't want to read too much into what he's saying here, but societies grow and evolve, and so do the needs and interests of their members. He's put society and the needs and interests of the members separate, and that's what kind of says that to me. So moving on, libertarians desire to roll things back to how they once were, once upon a time, because you would have to go that far back to find a point where these ideas would have formed the basis of a sound political system rather than a failed and useless ideology. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. He says going back as far as the founding fathers, and that's absolutely true. Sound political system based on libertarianism would have been something onto what they did, and it is a failed and useless ideology as a political system. Absolutely, and that's. I don't think anybody would dispute that. Well, I'm sure a lot of people would dispute that, but nobody with their head screwed on would. Politics is a failed and useless ideology as any kind of politics. I mean, you just, from an ethical and philosophical standpoint, you don't get to tell people what to do. The only time that you can get in people's business is when they're actively hurting you or somebody else, and that's it. There is no providing for sick people. This is something that free individuals need to take care of, because they do it so much better. There's no question that the state does nice things for people, but at the cost of what? I mean, amazing damage. That it's just this horrible machine that just consumes resources and capital, distorts markets, and gets people to this whole housing bubble that just happened. This was all the state. The state caused this to happen. It was blamed on the marketplace, but the state insured banks. They lowered interest rates. They lured capital investments in, and they were, of course, not sustainable. It's all just trickery. And this basic understanding of economics would show, which shows the state as, before I learned ethics and philosophy, I could see that the state was at fault. simply from studying economics, but I thought it could be fixed until I learned ethics and philosophy, and I realized that, oh, you can't, fix theft. You can never make theft okay, or, some kind of social contract. So he says, roll things back to the founding fathers, and that would make it work. I think a failed and useless ideology is the state itself. I mean, come on. We know, that war on drugs, there's never been so many drugs, war on terror. I mean, come on. Is anybody fooled anymore by this stuff? This is such nonsense. The failed and useless ideology is the state. So number 4, it puts on airs. In other words, libertarians are condescending. Many libertarian politicians and commentators like to cultivate an image of intellectual superiority for themselves, unlike liberals or conservatives. I think that's pretty funny, because liberals are pretty... I mean, look at the universities. They're filled with liberals. I mean, you don't find libertarians in the universities. I will agree, though. I mean, there are a lot of libertarians out there who are very, very intellectually superior in their in the way they present themselves, and it's hard to take. It is hard to take. But these are the politicians and the commentators on TV. These are not the real hardcore, band of us who are, who aren't afraid to say we're anarchists and not libertarians. But the liberals and the conservatives, or the non-libertarians, conservatives, as he quotes, absolutely no, they are not. They are very, very condescending. So he says libertarians ground themselves in reason. They are not swayed by emotion. They care not for what is popular or fashionable or empathetic or humane or fair. They're above all that. This is absolute. And again, he has said that this is U.S. politics, so I don't want to come down too hard on this guy, but this is the complete opposite, and this is not right. Care not for what is popular or fashionable, but empathetic, humane and fair. I mean, I empathize with people who are dying in hospitals here, and I mean, what we're looking at here is America is just a little bit behind us in terms of socialized healthcare, okay? People are dying in hallways in hospitals here because of socialized healthcare. Okay, that breaks my heart. What really breaks my heart is not the fact that they're dying there, but that they could, in the absence of state medicine, they could be okay. Not only in the absence of state medicine, because from a real philosophical standpoint, how you want to look at society is not about how we cure problems, but how we prevent them. And of course, when we look at our eating habits and our drinking habits and our the amount of times you go to the gym and all this kind of stuff, all these things are under consistent attack from the government. I mean, if you look at just food alone, you have the government subsidizing beef farmers, right? So in reality, right, in the real world without a state, it's about 7 to 9 times more expensive. You can get 7 to 9 times more plant matter from the same land than you can meat matter, right? So it's 9 to 7 times more expensive to have meat, effectively, if you give or take. And so why is it that you go down to McDonald's and you can get a hamburger for €1, and you go to you go somewhere to get a salad and it's like €5? Why? That doesn't make any sense. Like, salad should be way cheaper. If you look at just that, you could either say that hamburgers should be €7 in a free market, not €1, or you could say that salad should be like 10 cent or 20 cent for a decent portion of salad. There should be a 7-to-1 ratio there in reality. But what happens is government, because of lobbying from farmer unions, have subsidized beef farmers. And what that does is it causes people to turn their, what could have been plant growing land, they turn it into cow cultivating land or sheep or whatever. And, because it pays them more, that's their subsidies come from that. So we end up with there's a huge shift towards, unhealthy food. And so we're not eating the kind of healthy. And what would that do for the poor people? I mean, look at the poor. You would now look at meat and things like that as a luxury. So poor people would be eating healthy food because it would be far cheaper. And so it means you wouldn't have to pay as much in healthcare, because poorer people would actually be, relatively healthier. So that's just one example of, we could go into it all night. But no, I empathize with that. No, understanding that economic side, that really hurts me when I see this stuff happening. Humane. I mean, is it humane to have somebody smoking they smoke a spliff in a back garden, and a cop comes along, puts them in prison for 3 years, and they get raped in the steel, sweaty, horrible, crappy hole of a cage, where they're told to get up at a certain time, go to bed at a certain time, That's humane. Is it not humane to not want that? I don't want that. And then he says, or fair. And I hate the word fair, because again, this harkens back to this kind of, metaphysical. There is this kind of standard that exists. There is no standard. We're constant. The whole idea as people is we're constantly striving to up the standard. There's no fair. There's no entitlement. There's just you work to get and to build and to help others. That's what it is, isn't it? It's not it's not like this stuff's unfair. Oh, it's unfair. A hurricane, tore my house apart. It's not unfair. A hurricane tore your house apart. That sucks. It's really bad. No, let's work together to build it. I mean, there's no fairness in that. That's just how it works, living on this planet. So these, the kind of people who criticize anybody who has a problem with government, taxation, or these social programs, are imagining that there's this ideal kind of, and it's good. I mean, it's good to always look forward and look to, wow, we could have society like this. We could have already had a society where we wouldn't have to worry about healthcare and social security and all this kind of stuff. I mean, did you know they had a steam engine in ancient Greece? They had a steam engine, and they made toys out of it, because the capital holders who invest had so many slaves that had they started investing in machinery, it would have driven down the value of their stock to eventually nothing, and they would no longer have who owns slaves would have an interest in doing that. So because they had slaves, which was protected by the state, the convention that was protected by the state, they never invested in steam engines. We could have had trains 1,000 years ago. Imagine that. Imagine all the things. It's not like a meteor crashed Earth all of a sudden and we just discovered all these computers and technology and cars and all this. This was the process, and there are real problems that interfere with human development, and that includes theft and force and kidnapping and putting in cages and these problems of what would we do with people who murder. And I was like, well, it's possible. We now understand the roots of violence. We understand the roots of murder. We understand how to check people if they have problems, if they have neurological problems that would cause them to murder people. We can check all that stuff. There's so many ways around it. It's going to be a matter of time. People are going to look back on our time, even on 100 years, and go, what in the world were they doing? That was so crazy. People used to do what? They used to murder people? Like that really is, and I know this sounds utopian, but it's not. It's just scientific. We actually know this stuff now. It's relatively recently, but we know how to stop violence. We know how to do that, and we know how to stop, we know how to stop tons of stuff, but it's like, how many people are talking about, polio vaccine? I mean, do we go, well, how are we going to pay, if we do away with the government, how are we going to do with, what about people who get polio? It's not a question. We've already gotten rid of polio. Well, how are we going to take care of violent people or people who steal? Well, not give them a government for a start, to run. That would be a start. Not create an institution where you can legalize pretty much everything that everyone else would be considered a criminal for doing, and then have these people who have the foresight enough to control their impulses until they get into office, and then or into the police or whatever state institution they're going for. So no, empathy and humanity are at the core of anarchism, and at the core of real libertarianism. I'd like to say philosophical libertarianism. I hate to be splitting hairs over that, but they're really. I mean, there's a lot of people who call themselves libertarian, and they're really just they're quite simple minded. A lot, not all. So fifthly, the final point, he says it's naive. So besides being outdated and buffoonishly pompous, it assumes given maximum personal and economic freedom, individuals would just sort of work out an ideal, or at least improve society for themselves. Never mind that democratic government represents an attempt to do exactly that sort of thing. Suppose that not everyone in this minimally governed free market society was all that ethical. Suppose, and I know that this is hard to imagine, but bear with me, that those with the most wealth and resources decided that their private interests were more important than those of other individuals or as society as a whole. Libertarians often caricature government as the powerful, living off the powerless with no concern for the welfare of those they exploit. There's a lot in this. So it assumes libertarianism, so this is why it's naive. It assumes given maximum personal and economic freedom, individuals just sort of work out an ideal, or at least improve society for themselves. This part is very interesting. Never mind that democratic government represents an attempt to do exactly that sort of thing. So at this point, I'm a little confused where his position is, because if he's saying that, I mean, maybe he's saying the government is bad too. I can't tell now. But if he's saying that, or it's naive to assume a system would work out an ideal to improve society, then democratic government represents an attempt to do exactly that sort of thing. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and just side with the fact that he's saying work out an ideal, rather than the maximum personal and economic freedom. I would assume that those two should be part of a better ideal, though, maximum personal and economic freedom. That really would be the goal of the statist as well. I would think, somebody who thinks the state is there to help, is there to protect your economic freedom, so that you can, give you protection so you can continue to work and to have resources and that. But democratic government, he just seems to have lumped the two in together, and now I'm not so sure. But that really is true. I mean, democratic government really is an attempt to improve society in terms of what people imagine. Now the problem is, and we'll go back to the first sentence, suppose that not everyone in this minimally governed free market society was all that ethical. Well, that's exactly what I am doing. I'm assuming that not everyone is that ethical, and for that reason I want there to not exist the state, because the state is where you would go if you were not ethical, because that's where you can go to this is and we can map this. I'll be doing a show coming up soon dealing with psychopaths and how they find their way into office and to churches and to any kind of institution where there's weakness, or mass groups of vulnerable people, and you're basically giving them, you're making a place where all someone has to do is convince a group of people that they're trustworthy, right? Which is something that a crazy, unethical person has no problem doing. We understand this about psychopaths, that they're very, very good at this kind of thing. And it's somewhere that, okay, so you have all the guns, you can write all the laws, you can kidnap whoever you want. At the very heights of the state, you can kill whoever you want. You really can. And this idea that there's some kind of accountability by the people is absolute garbage. That's been totally challenged. I mean, look at what's been going on with Snowden or Manning. These guys, they come out and they say, hey, look what your government's doing, and everyone just goes, you absolute scumbag, and he has to leave the country and go to like China or Russia. I mean, he's hiding in China. What does that tell you? He's safer in China, speaking out against the state, than he is in America. That's terrifying. It's a very, very, very bad idea that if you have people, because if you had loads of good people, loads of ethical, if society was 100% ethical, then you could have a state. I mean, then you could have a government if you wanted, if everybody was ethical, and then you'd be guaranteed that no one can manipulate it, right? But the state is there to manipulate. It's where if you're in business, when there's a state, you need to go after some politician to make sure certain regulation stays the way it is or goes through in your favor. You have to. I mean, that's how you do business. You have to pay taxes. You have to pay them money, and in exchange, you're going to want stuff back, because the business is not sustainable if you're just constantly giving out money. The state has to give you something back. It has to reciprocate, and that's exactly what happens. The state makes it very, very easy for those already in position. Whoever has the most amount of money or resources they can give to individual actors in the state, then the individual actors in the state are able to make the state favorable to them, and that's what we've seen. I mean, that's what we see with the property developers, the bankers, the stock markets, all of that. That's what we see, and it's very much because a lot of people are unethical that I don't want a government. Okay, so and that's why. I mean, that would be at the very core of proper anarchistic thinking, philosophically at least. Also, I think it's worth noting as well that he's, the fourth point he was saying libertarians are condescending, and then he says, free market society was all that. Let's imagine that not everyone in this minimally governed free market society was all that ethical. Suppose, and I know this is hard to imagine, but bear with me, it came across a bit condescending, just saying, throwing it out there, that those with the most wealth and resources decided that their private interests were more important than those of other individuals or society as a whole. Those with the most wealth and resources in an open market are those who have earned it. Okay, so it's not like all of a sudden you have all these people with all this stuff and then everyone else has nothing. Look at Apple or anyone. I mean, okay, so we just take Apple. The reason that company is so successful is not because they took a bunch of money from the poor people. They're so successful because they figured out a way of meeting need, and all the people who had that need or that perceived need, that want, spent the money that they had to get the thing that Apple had made. Now, I have not made an iPhone, which means I have not provided for a massive need. These guys could. These guys could make this need. And that, in exchange, it's just this idea that they have to give something back. They've already given it back. I mean, how much would it cost me to build an iPhone? It would probably cost me a few million, you know. I'd have to hire all sorts of people. I don't know how to make glass on the screen. I don't know how to make batteries. You know, how many people do know how to do that stuff? It's a massive collaboration. You're talking about thousands and thousands of people involved in the manufacture of one single iPhone. And these guys put that money up ahead of time. They looked for investment. They found people who would give them money to develop a prototype. And they looked into the future and they said, look, this is something that people are going to want. And then they introduced it in the market and they were right. And they got paid for it. They got back what they gave. They first gave into the market, and they made the market amazing. I mean, how many lives have been saved because people have these phones. They can call for help. They can they can look up on some medical app the problems with people's heart. It improves everyone's life in every possible way to have these things, and that's why they have money. It's not because no, there are problems I have with Apple, and again because of their involvement with the state. There's patent trolling stuff and that kind of nonsense. And but no, I mean, to criticize them, to criticize the people with the most wealth and resources, you're literally criticizing the people who have given the most. Now, if that wealth and resources were taken, I would have a problem with that. But if it didn't belong to them, we could just go and get it back, right? I mean, if it's true that it's been stolen from people, then you just get a group of those people together and go get it back. I mean, what's the problem with it? I don't understand the problem with that. Not only that, but the most wealth. I mean, again, what good is having all the money in the world if you don't have stuff to spend it on? So if everybody else doesn't have any, what are you going to do with it? I mean, you're just going to sit. It has no value. Money's value is in exchange. It doesn't have this fixed metaphysical value like the €5 note is always worth it. It's not. It's worth what its ability to exchange. So long as people want to trade for it, it's worth something. So long as you have all of it and nobody has any money for investment in building and creating, then, imagine it. I mean, imagine you were the person with everything and nobody had anything else in the country and they all just starved to death. What are you going to do? I mean, you're going to starve to death because you don't know how to farm. You don't know how to, you don't know how to make wells and stuff. You're just going into a very primitive society. People with resources and wealth, on the whole, who have earned it, want to reinvest. And those who don't will lose it very, very quickly. They just, in a market environment, they don't survive. That's just what happens. So they just can't. I mean, mathematically, you can't survive in that. So libertarians often caricature government as the powerful living off the powerless with no concern for the welfare of those they exploit. The alternative to government that libertarians propose, in their bitterness to having been born a social species they perceive as tyranny at the hands of government, amounts to tyranny at the hands of unaccountable magnates. Again, and I see the angle here that it's these magnates, but these magnates are wealthy. These wealthy individuals that are around today are wealthy because of the state. They are effectively the state. You look at Halliburton, for example, with this whole, the Afghani and Iraq thing. Dick Cheney was on the board of Halliburton, and he was also influencing policy that caused the American troops to go in. He's now very, very wealthy because of his position in the state. So this is not a one-stop. This is what's there. This people who have no problem killing for money or hurting people or stealing from people. That's where you go. You go into government. That's your place. We can't look at corporations that exist today and say, well, we do away with government and these guys will be in charge. No, they really wouldn't. Corporations would fail without the backing of taxes. I mean, at least inefficient corporations, as soon as they hit a brick wall or they cause some product, I don't know, like a phone that explodes after 5 minutes, there'd be so many lawsuits that they'd collapse. I mean, it's as simple as that. You would, and nobody would ever buy their products again. They're gone. They're finished. And people would end up having to pay a significant recompense for that. So, and that would bust them. So that's how you deal with it. I would say it would be a very, very difficult transition. And I don't think, if it was overnight, it would be difficult. I don't think it's going to happen that way. Government is an effect of psychological problems in a vast majority of people. So you can't get rid of that overnight. It would just manifest elsewhere. If the government just disappeared, aliens came down and zapped it, you would have absolute chaos. You really would, because people are not capable of handling a world without a government yet. But it would only take it would literally take a couple of years. I reckon it would take a couple of years, just to get the ideas right, to educate people correctly, and to get the incentives correctly organized, ethically organized, rather than around taxation and this kind of thing. So just to finish up, he said, minimum government, maximum freedom to those who can afford it. And this is just, it's economically unsound. And again, he's talking about, politicians in US politics. You can either have rules or rulers. You can't have both. You can't have both. Rules are for everybody, or you have rulers who can just shift the goalposts whenever they want, and that's a real problem. So thanks so much for listening. Counterintuition.com. Do stop by.